Welcome back to the podcast. Today we've got the amazing Traci Austin on board with us. She's going to show us how to optimize our talent pool and really work on creating the human beings and the systems and the people that grow our organizations. Traci Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthony.
Well, your favorite motto, start it, go right at me. Go ahead.
Yep. Stop bitching and start pitching. I want to know what all those complaints are.
Well, look, when we were looking at people, it's like, look, if I had the right group of people, I could run this world. We've got the ideas, right? But getting human beings, Traci Austin, trying to get human beings all lined up. Oftentimes as a leader, I feel like I'm herding cats.
Absolutely. I think that's what we do in construction is we're herding cats a lot of the times, and half of them are going in a different direction and just don't show up. I don't know. At least that's my experience.
So, sitting here in this seat over the 28 years of running this, I watch human beings come and go through the organization. And, some of the core people are steady eddies and you can count on them and they're there. Maybe sometimes it's not about being the rock star every day, but, getting people you can count on that can show up and deliver, right? Who can chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water, right? They're just steady and you can count on them. Right. And then you get some people who you can do that sometimes. And then there's that employee who shows up to like a rock star one day and then they're a mess the next day. Right. It's kind of like, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have the chop wood, carry water, someone you can count on? Or do you want that, the one who comes with rock star and then shit show?
Well, I think we all want the steady Eddie, but we also need the rock star because we need somebody that's going to push the buttons and push a project forward. And so the key is understanding the days that they don't show up as a rock star, what's really going on and what led into that, and how quickly can we resolve it?
I sit here and that comes to my brain every moment when that happens. I look at them and the problem is I put on them what comes out of me, right? A lot of times I will put on them and go, all right, based on my experience, all right, what's going on in their family life? What's going on in their personal life? How are they, eating, sleeping, drinking? What's the behaviors they are outside of here so that when they show up, it'd be great if I could get people, before they got to work and I got them tuned in to get to work.
Right. So I have a plate sitting behind me and it says, I wonder what's on their plate that I don't yet know about. And what that does is that creates that curiosity. And when we believe in someone else and when we show some of that interest in someone else, they're much more likely to want to give that back to us. And, so one of the things you said is, how do we get them to show up here every day? They need to be valued. And they need to know that they are valued at work because we all want to make an impact. I don't know about you, but that's why I do what I do, right? I want to make an impact in what I'm doing. And for some folks, it is seeing that building once it's built and being beautiful and driving by it with their kids. For others, it is what they're doing on the job site. It's figuring out for each person what drives them every day and what also stops them from showing up. And that's where the, stop bitching, start pitching comes from, is what are their complaints and how do we figure out what the request is from that complaint so we can actually serve them?
What's funny is when you say that, what rings in my brain is there are those employees that work really, really well, and they've earned the right to go, hey, when they're having an off day, you really want to find out what's going on. Right? Yeah. Like as an owner, there's certain people that they're rock stars, and when they're off, that it's not their natural being. But then there's more often than not, really the ones that really bitch the most are typically the ones who show up and they're a shit show all the time, and you're like, look, I don't have the time to be a therapist all day. I just don't have the time to do that. And that's the hard part. I want to be like there's one inside of me who wants to be Tony Robbins and go help the entire world. I love that. I love helping people, but I also have to run a company and it's exhausting. So you get kind of both. So where is that sweet spot as you look at the humans that you hire, right? Cause like the one who comes on and is always naturally there. Great. When they have an off day, you can give them the grace for that.
Yeah.
It's the other one who's not that. He hasn't earned the right to do that. You know what I mean?
100% know what you mean. So there's 4 levers that we look at in engagement. The first one is fit to role. So the guy, the gal that's showing up as that shit show every day, I'm curious if they're actually in the right role. more than likely they're not in the right role, which is part of the reason why they are showing up in that way. They hate work. I've been in a job doing payroll. I'm not that detail oriented. You know what? I hated life because I hated my job because I was not in the right role. So first lever, if I can talk today, the first lever is fit to role. Do we have the right people in the right role inside of the organization? The second lever we're looking at is, are they on the right team based on the strategy that we are executing? Meaning, when we put teams together, there's different things we need to have happen. We need that craftsman person. We need that person that is super detail oriented, that's going to keep all the things humming along. We need that individual that is great at problem solving. We need the visionary. We need all those things. But if we don't have the right team together, it's going to fail. So 1 is fit to role, 2 is team, 3 is that leader leading them the way they need to be led. Meaning, if you're leading me, one of the things I really need is I need to have some autonomy in my role. I need to know what winning looks like, and I need you to let me loose to do it. Others really need that strong roadmap, right? So are we leading people the way they need to be led? The fourth is their core values, personal values, aligned with the core values of the organization? If your company core values are things like integrity and teamwork and those kind of things, and this individual's all about them and what they're going to do and cut corners, it is not aligned on personal values and core values. So those 4 levers really tell us where we're at. So when we start talking about bitching about employees or employees complaining about different things, it's figuring out what lever we need to start playing with to move them forward.
I love that. So there is something about the bitching about an employee or a group that becomes this racket, right?
Absolutely.
I look at myself and go, all right, look, either bitch or get off the pot, right?
Yep.
Stop the whining about somebody. Like, figure out, all right, what is it? I love what you're saying. The wrong person, the wrong position. Look, and you're always trying to look at that, but human beings come with so many complexities, right? There are so many different diversions of people. There's no right I never have found the right consistent formula for that.
Right. And so there's a couple different things, like when we're hiring, that we look at. There's 3 key ones. 1 is culture. If they're not aligned to the culture and what our expectations are, we can tell that in an interview. We should never bring them on board. So often we do.
How do you get that in an interview?
Yeah.
Like how at an interview do you get culture? I mean, yeah, look, people, it's like going on a first date. Remember first date? Everybody I ever dated on the first date, they were this beautiful little girl and they were great. And I couldn't wait oh my God, that's so great. I can't wait to date her again. And then you're about 3 months into it and you're like, dude, she's bullied my cat. Right. Right. So, how do you, right, on a first date, on the first interview, they all show up like that, but how are you really getting to who they are?
Yeah. And this is such a great question. And so a lot of times we're asking very behavioral based questions about, give me an example of XYZ on a job site. So if you're looking for integrity, it might be, tell me about a time when you were responsible for, the setup and the cleanup on a job site, and what did you do? Give me examples of what you were responsible for and what the team was responsible for. Give me examples of X, Y, and Z. So you're able to start pinging off of what they're saying, but you never want to ask questions that are out there that is not a lived experience. So we're always looking for those lived experiences where we can ask follow-up questions, because a lot of times it's going to get, well, Anthony did this or Anthony did that. No, but Tracy, what exactly did you do? And we can start really getting into that. The second question I love to ask is, okay, you just talked a lot about Anthony in that conversation. So if I were to call Anthony right now, after we get off this phone call, and ask him a little bit about how you showed up as a team player on this job site, what would he tell me? Awesome. And I've got his number, and you've signed the release, so I can go ahead and do a reference check. Is there anything else I should know? So that's how we're digging into it, is digging into it from that standpoint.
So what I will tell you is that the problem with the interviewer if it's me or anybody else in my organization, when you're interviewing, it's almost like you're trying, at least for me, I find myself trying to find the rose. I'm trying to fill a role. So I'm
Hmm.
trying to look for the positive part of them. And you don't necessarily look for the one that's missing, right? It's, it's like one of those disciplines as an interviewer. How do you get to the real person and not try to fill the quota? I can't
Right.
tell you how many times, we just got done interviewing a guy that we thought we were going to have him start like this week, or we're going to have him start on Monday. And we interviewed him. He's been here for multiple interviews, and we go to go to pull the trigger on him, and the role is about a traveling project manager,
Hmm.
and we find out that he doesn't want to travel. I'm
Hmm.
like, how could we have gone through multiple interviews
Right.
and really listened to what for our needs, and find out when we go to hire? Imagine if we would have hired him and then found out afterwards,
Yeah.
right? So what happens, I feel like, is I never here. I interviewed him myself, right? And in fact, I didn't ask that question. I was trying to make him fit,
Right.
right? Do you get, like, I think there's one of the flaws with the way that we interview is that I'm trying to find them. I'm trying to make them right.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's a couple key things that we typically do. One is looking at what are those essential functions of the role that is an absolute no. So guess what? If they're not willing to travel 60% or more of the time, they're an absolute no. Then this becomes actually in the form before they even interview. So it doesn't even get past that. And typically there's 10, 15 of those that are there. The next thing that we do is we do something called a job assessment. We're looking at the behavioral factors, things like attention to detail. And, do they is a deadline in stone or is a deadline negotiable, right? So we use assessments to do this. There's a ton of them out there, but we're looking at what is the role based on people that are actually in it and those that are supervising. And then we look at their natural behavioral styles.
I think that's great. I mean, because a lot of times we don't do that, where we really go through and think about, get a little bit more detailed about, hey, look, you're going to be a project manager. Are you able to handle traveling, 30 to 60% of the time? And that means, like, you're talking 2 or 3 days every week. Are you,
Mm-hmm.
are you good with that? You're going to pack your stuff up and be able to go on the road and rent cars and live out of hotels and be able to eat healthy and all that kind of good stuff. Being able to get a little bit more, given the good, bad, and the ugly of the position.
Right. Another one I love to do, especially with professional level roles, is give them a scenario that is very similar to what you're going to see in the role. So as a project manager, that could be, here's a snippet of a scenario of an email that they may receive. Please write the response email to this individual without using ChatGPT or Ask Claude.
Like, what do you mean? I don't know how to write anything anymore. I just chat everything.
Right. But look, ChatGPT, Ask Claude are fine as a supplement, not as the only way to do things,
Yeah.
right? And so really asking for what you want up front. And the key here is knowing what you want and having clarity of what winning is going to look like in this role before you start. Like, what are those top 3 outcomes that this individual needs to produce in the first 90 days? If we know that right up front, and we can ask questions about how they're going to step into that in the interview, and we already have a sliding scale on a scale of 1 to 5. So all of our interview questions are actually 1 to 5 on what it is, along with examples of what's there. So that allows you as the interviewer to say, which one do they actually fit versus they're all 5s because I need a body in here tomorrow.
Well, see, and I think ultimately that's one of the biggest problems with hiring is that to really get great people, it takes a lot of time and interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think ultimately there is no shortcoming. Every time we rush it, it's like somebody has to do it all the time, every day. It does not. I just haven't seen. You can't really rush hiring great people. what happens is you look for the things you want, you're trying to look for the check boxes you want instead of looking for the check boxes you don't want.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
You kind of make them fit, even if they don't, you make orange red
Right.
all of a sudden. Yeah.
And especially because you're right off this experience, it's going and saying, hey, what are all the things we missed?
Yeah.
Now, it's so much easier for a brain to look at what we missed or the failures or the complaints than it is for all the things that went right, but if we can list all the things we missed, we can then reframe it to what we need and we can build it into our process. And when we start to build those processes, it starts to make it easier every single time where we can make those incremental improvements and have those incremental wins.
Spend that time. I think that's creating the system and the people to do that. Like right now, I feel like that's one of the ones for us. That's a big deal. Is having that system where we can really have, that we're really spend the time to find the best in class and spend the time to do that, not try to rush it.
Right.
Unfortunately, the way the projects happen for us, there's this ebb and tide of them, right? Like you don't need them, but you're having to interview during periods of time when you may not need someone on board.
Right. Yeah. And what I love about some of the systems we use a system called Predictive Index. So we create a project management role in there. We've done behavioral assessments on that, but then we also have the list of folks we've interviewed in the past. And, the first place we typically go is folks we've talked to in the past, whether that's 6 months ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, that we thought were potential good fits, is they're already familiar with the organization. They're already familiar and they've already had conversations with you. All right. So that's one pool to look at. The next pool is, who are we looking at internal inside of our organization that's grown up through the ranks? Have we started to create a talent pathway plan for individuals to step into these roles along with a people strategy that says, look, here's where we're specifically going with what we think we're going to need based on projects. And it's hard in construction because we don't know if that $50 million project is going to come in next month or a year from now.
But the idea of the growing them within, that comes with some complexity.
Oh,
right?
It does. Huge complexity.
Because it's like you can't, that takes time also, right? I mean, I've done the same mistake in internal where you bring someone from one position, you move them over to another position. We just had that happen where we took a project manager for a program, moved him into director role, and he just failed. Mm-hmm. And he literally just, it scared him and he left the company. Mm-hmm. And he was frustrated as all get out, right? There was because all of a sudden you go from one role to the next role, and you got to step in a little bit of stupid for a little bit, right? And how do we do that for people that they don't feel scared, and you support them through that transition, right? Sometimes that's really, I just noticed, at least for me, we haven't done that well all the time. We bring them in, and surrounding them with support comes with a little bit of, we've messed it up. I've messed it up for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a theme here.
Yeah.
Nothing's fast. Nothing's easy.
No.
Which is the systemization of it to say, okay, what actually works? Because every time we do this and we lose someone, it's like we're 5 steps back. So what are those key pieces that we can create that jump from a project manager to a director level? What are the biggest challenges there? Now we can start to look at that and say, okay, what's the in-role growth that has to happen in order to truly jump from here to here? We do that. Oh, go ahead.
I got it, but help me out with that, because this sounds good to say. Here, look, and I appreciate it. Look, it sounds good to say, but who does it the best? What companies out there are doing this the best that you can watch, right? Because I mean, a lot of the guys, it just feels like human beings move. I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I get a little worn out by it. Like, all right, how many more things can you do to try to make an employee happy or transition? Is it just that human beings go through what human beings go through? Or is there really a system that works and that you've seen work throughout other organizations?
Yeah,
Like who's doing it the best?
I think there's an and both. So we work with primarily smaller trade organizations. So there's 2 trade organizations we're working with that have done this really well. One's corporate contractors, CCI, the other one is Mid-State Concrete. What both of them have done really well is they have lined out pathways for folks to grow in. I've also done this pretty well in nursing homes, moving up from like CNA, RN positions, those kind of things. And in all of those, what has happened is, especially at the line level role, for folks coming in, that straight labor position, yes, they're going to go through things like the apprenticeship programs. They're going to go through those to ensure they have the skill sets, but then they're introducing things like new hire buddy or mentorship programs where we're training them in leadership skills before we give them a leadership role. And what that does is that supports shifting the turnover in the first 90 days. It also supports not having that leadership gap inside of the organization. So yeah, we're moving from that entry-level role to that first level, lead supervisor type of role. And then when we start going from those project management to those leadership roles, what we're starting to do there is we're very specifically looking at mentorship, both inside the organization and outside, using other organizations like the ABCs, those type of organizations to say, how are we connecting to really ensure you have a mentor to talk about these things as they go so you're not out there on an island.
Look, I really get that. Like having a people strategy is really important. Like I get, like I think every leader does, right? Human capital is what makes the organization, right? The language they speak about you and the systems that they're brought up through, really what make the organization. The language of how they see their future, the language of how the company speaks to them about their future, their role, their growth. I think that's a big part of a company's or employees' experience and their potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think every leader gets that. I mean, having human strategy or having human capital strategy, I think that's a pretty core need to grow any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you see this too, but do you have folks leave because they don't feel there's growth potential inside the organization?
No.
Okay, good.
For us, we grow so fast. It's really that. Most of the time, we'll get people that will get, the frustration of the ebb and tide of what goes on.
Yep.
You get burnout, or they'll get, I don't hear. They'll move on to something else. They'll go start their own company. Yep. We had some folks last year, 3 guys who left us that went and started their own organization, and some of that just comes with, all right, they've grown up, and yeah, good for them. You made, you kind of built your own competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those are the best, because they're not going to be happy here if they have an entrepreneurial mindset, and we can't provide that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and Aaron, no, we have an entrepreneurial mindset. We'll have that for them. And I think sometimes people just need to go out and, like those guys, they needed to go to do that. They may or may not be successful. Here, I wish them all the luck in the world to go do it. Sometimes it's like my children. At some point they need to separate from parents to go have their own experience. Mm-hmm. And that's fair enough, right?
We just don't want the boomeranging back. Some employees were okay if they boomerang back.
Yeah, no, you definitely get that. Let's talk about creating culture.
Yeah.
Right. So what does it mean to create culture?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we want to do is define what culture is. What we find is if we don't define what it is we're talking about, we're not aligned on what it is. So we define culture as the behaviors that you allow and don't allow inside of the organization, right? So what is that culture? So I'm curious, how do you define culture?
Man, I mean, what you allow, what you don't allow. Today, there is a much wider fairway of things I allow than I did when I started. My early days of doing this, we were a military. I ran it more like a Spartan war camp. Either you're in or you're out. I didn't have much tolerance for nonsense, and just and sometimes I feel like people actually worked better that way. We kind of knew that there was no BS tolerance.
Right.
And, but that came with, we'd lose some people, right? Like, hey, look, we just don't have time for you to, to do it. Now today, I kind of look at it and go, look, maybe it's me. I'm a little softer, a little bigger. I want to grow human beings, even when they're not perfect. And I realize sometimes that, it's hard to be an employee in today's world, right? I mean, so many people are so distracted. The world is coming at them so much faster than ever before. Yesterday I went from Chicago to LA and back in the same day. And as I travel, I can really start to see human beings. It used to be that I would travel through airports and I would watch people and there'd be, 20 or 30% of people on a device.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, literally 100% of every single person that I traveled with or traveled next to were on some sort of device.
Right.
Right. Just imagine that complexity. Just add that here. Just add here one item. That's just one item.
Yep.
Right. Let alone, going through AI, going through changes, governmental changes, all the stuff that's happening with human beings today. It's a much more complex world for them to operate in.
Yeah, absolutely is. And what is the expectation that you have of folks when they are at work?
That's a good one. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, for example, is there an expectation that when they are at work, that they're at work, and define that? So I'll give an example. I do a lot of leadership training and I make it very clear up front. There's no computers in here. There's no phones in here. If I see you consistently looking at your watch, I'm going to ask you to put your watch away. When we sign up for our leadership development program, I send out an email to their immediate supervisor that says, what are your expectations for them out of this program? What are you going to be working with them on while they are here so I can help to support that? And when they are in this class for 8 weeks, 3 hours a week, there is no interaction with the outside. Is that okay? Because if not, then I'm not going to allow them in the class. So I'm setting the expectations up front. And we spend the first half hour setting expectations for behaviors in the course. Is that a helpful example?
That's a great one. Look, if I had a want, I would literally take everybody's cell phone at the front door. I'd have you plug your cell phone in, and if you needed to, if you get contacted by somebody, if I had a want, if I had one want that I could change, I think it would change human beings' focus, is taking people's cell phones, mm-hmm. right? And just have if someone needs a contact, you call the front desk, let them get a hold of you. But the people, the distraction of just cell phones in the office place is just in itself 20 or 30% of humans' brains. I mean,
what is?
If you look around, the people scrolling during work, mm-hmm. right? I mean, it's crazy.
Which kills productivity because our minds are not meant to multitask. We're not great at it, at all.
we get exhausted. Well, I don't hear. I think our minds can do a lot. I mean, there really is a big capacity, but just when you look at how productive someone is, it starts. I think that's a big one.
Right.
Now, I think the other one would be, how do I get them centered? I did a course with a group just recently called Landmark. And it's about this transformational deal. So I don't know if have you ever done Landmark?
I've been introduced to a lot of Landmark. I've done things very similar to Landmark, but not Landmark itself.
I walked in this course. It was 250 people. It was 150 people in the 275 people, or there was 150 people in the room, 125 people online. The promise was that everybody would have a transformation during this 3 days, 1 night seminar. And it was pretty amazing, right? Like you really went through and people had these big breakthroughs, change your life, really get into action, really create some opportunity. It was really about, seeing your blind spots and taking things out front. It was really this dynamic experience. And I kind of pulled the lady aside and I'm like, how do you guys do this? Like it really does amaze me that you go through these distinctions over the 3 days and the 1 night, and you really look at it and you go, and start to really look at how they do it. And the lady said to me, she goes, look, what you're not seeing is we've got a whole system for this.
Yeah.
Right. She goes, do you see that lady back there with she had, like a black name tag on. She goes, that lady, she picked me up from the airport. I go, what do you mean? She goes, literally, she picked me up from the airport. I walked outside. She had my bio, everything, all my expectations. She literally had all of my stuff set up in my room. My hotel room was already set up. I was already checked into. The clothes that I'm going to wear during the seminar were already in my room, ready to go. I had sent them in advance. She knew the things I like, where I want. So there was no friction at the at the doorway, at the entrance, or getting here. So from that second, I was able to take all that off my plate. That lady kind of set me up. And if you notice that throughout the whole course, she communicates with everybody outside of this little bubble. When I get in this bubble called Landmark for the weekend, I'm fully here for the staff, and that's it. And she handles all of my outside communication with my family, with anything I need to get done. That person, in every city I go to, every weekend that she does this a few weekends a month. That person, I don't even have to interact with. They know what to expect. It's already a role set up, and they interact with my food, my things I need. All that gets taken care of by that person right there. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And she goes, you see that guy over there? His name is Mike. And Mike's literally in charge of all the mics in the room. So he goes through and he checks all the mics in this room throughout the day. And every time a participant walks up to a mic, it works perfectly, right? The batteries are fresh. There's nothing wrong. The sound's perfect. And both for online people and here. So every time someone online communicates, the people in the room can hear it. The people in the room, when they speak, the people online can hear it. And he goes, if that didn't happen, there'd be real complexity there. If it wouldn't work because there'd be some confusion. Right. And then so each person in the room goes, do you notice that every time you came back from a break, the room was meticulously set up? Because we as a company have set up this little device that knows how to measures between each seat perfectly. So we know over 3.5 million people, we've done this around the world. We know exactly how much room each seat needs to have in between for everybody to have enough room, but not take up too much space, but be perfectly aligned. And every room and every landmark program we do is set up the exact same way. And we've kind of just set these parameters for this. And I'm like, boy, that's an interesting way of looking at it. The systems they have in place to function properly, right? To be able to deliver on the promise of transformation of 275 people. It came with a real system to do that. It wasn't like she had to come in the morning and she had to do a prep or a walkthrough.
Right.
Each role was trained well before she ever got there.
Right. And so the systems, but each person was in the right fit to role. They weren't doing things that they weren't great at. They're doing the things that they're meant to be doing. She was meant to facilitate, therefore she's facilitating. Mike was meant to Mike, right? And so like when we look at that inside of our own organizations in that fit to role, are we having people take care of everything in the house, including the kitchen sink? Or are we truly aligning them with the things that they do best and keeping it to that piece? And what I find so often in organizations is that we grow people. Grow is not the right word. We force folks to take on more than what they are capable of at a speed higher than what is possible for them to be successful. And they end up leaving because we're setting them up to fail versus setting them up to succeed. Like in the example you just gave, if she would have come in and had to handle absolutely everything in that room, top to bottom, no transformations would happen because she does not have the capacity to do 15 roles well. Yet in organizations, we're asking our folks to do 10, 15 different roles because we haven't aligned the roles and the job descriptions to each person's highest ability and what they're best at and want to do.
So let's talk about that. So
yeah,
with that's a tough one, right? So when you look at a project manager, go, all right, how do I line them up so their role has this call it these parameters, right? The truth is nothing ever happens the exact same.
Correct.
Right? I mean, there's never like a time when you go, well, every project runs the same. All of a sudden you got an inspector that's a problem. Over here you got a sub that's a problem. Over here you got a superintendent who got drunk and fell asleep on the job site. They all come with these individual, unique. So there's kind of like the role, and then being able to just be flexible. And I would say it's almost true. You could almost say that's true of every role in the organization.
Right. So let me push back a little bit on this.
Yeah, talk to me.
Yeah. So when we look at that project manager role, what is 85% of their role?
So their job is really to really create a budget, operate in that budget, and turn over on time.
Yep.
So really
Okay.
budget and expectation, budget and schedule.
Is their job supply chain? Is their job supervision of all the staff on the site? Is their job scheduling? Is their job proposals? Is their job final reports? So you see I'm coming up with a laundry list here. And what we see so often happens is that project manager is doing everything versus, hey, do we have maybe one person at the office that's 100% responsible for permitting? That is not a people person, but they're a really, really good detail-oriented person, and they are amazing on government websites, right? Versus having the project manager do that for every project. Do we have, so we can start to suss out what are those different pieces that we can truly centralize where we have really great communication happening once it's systematized to start to create those roles that allow that project manager to truly do that key project management when they are on site and they know exactly who to call that's centralized for all of your jobs in those other areas.
Well, I think you do. And then all of a sudden that person quits, right? You're doing great. You got lined up. You got that perfect person to do all the permitting stuff. And then, I don't know, they get married. Now, all of a sudden you lost your perfect, now the team's got to absorb that work until somebody else can get up and train to get going.
Yeah. True story.
Like true story. Like literally that's a true story. Like it happens all the time. Like companies come with, that happens all day long. And you're like, well, I'm sorry. I know that wasn't in your role before, but now, sorry, but Bob just left. And now you got to help. We all got to jump in and do that. And then you got the employees like, well, that wasn't my role. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, but that's, that's part of being, I don't know a company that doesn't happen. And I think it's silly when we look at them and go, how could you expect a company not to have that? I just don't see how you find organizations that's not happening all the time.
Yeah. And some of it's size, right? You've got larger organizations that can do this much, much better than smaller organizations.
But even them, like one of my best friends runs a large pharmaceutical company, and it happens more with them than anybody. They got headhunters that are poaching their people all the time. He goes, if we get a 2-year tenure out of an executive, it's kind of amazing. Right. They get, they all of a sudden get these headhunters who come in and just, snatch them all up and give them another 50 grand to go someplace else. And, so look, how do you create a space that goes, that's going to happen?
Right.
And how do you help people to go through? It's never that linear. I think that's the problem, is that we lie to them and say that somehow or another, it's going to be that linear. And maybe I'm right here, but look, this is where I need you, the coach, the example, to go, help me explain it. That there is a way to find where that happens.
Yeah.
Because in 28 years of sitting here, it's more like a soup. And like, one day you got too many carrots, one day you got too much chicken, then it's too salty, then you need some more noodles. It's like, that's always the feeling I have when you're growing these.
Yeah. So I think there's two things. One, there's an and both, right? And what I mean by and both is we can say, here's what we're looking towards, and we know we'll never, ever hit an ideal. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at celebrating the wins every single day to get as close as we can to what is going to work for the organization. And that also starts to take the buy-in as to really getting curious about why people are leaving, because guess what? Even though recruiters are calling and it's a $50,000 difference for what they're making, is that big of a deal, or is there something else happening? They'll always tell us it's wage, but it's typically something else that's underneath it. So it's the and both of knowing, all right, this is what we're looking to create. We also know there's going to be times we're going to have to step in and we're going to have to do things a little bit differently. Yet in that stepping in, you may find that permitting job is something you actually like much more than the actual project management job. Now, all of a sudden, what we're starting to do based on our one-on-ones is start to understand what is the highest and best ability of each of our folks that they actually want to spend their most time in. Yes, we've got chaos. Yes, we run really fast. Yes, all those things happen. And that's an expectation, right? So that's an expectation in any organization that we work with. We're going to have all those things, and we're going to work towards what works best for what each of you need. And so that's what we find is it's always an and both, because we can't make, and it's stupid to make promises we can't deliver on. That never works.
Yeah.
But if they see us working with them as an and both, they're much more likely to start to say, hey, here's some ways that we can start to solve this problem by making requests. Well, what if we did this instead? Instead of, Bob just left and he was our permitting person. It worked great. Yeah, you know what? We've got Sarah over here who has huge potential, but she doesn't have this piece of Bob's job. What if we were to do this and that? And I'm actually really good at this. What do you think? So a key piece here is to ensure we're bringing our team into the mix and into the conversation, that we're having it with them versus about them.
Oh, I love that. And that's what happens when people leave. Like all of a sudden you see other people who step in, right? Something will change in an organization. Then you see someone step in and you're like, there you go.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the most successful. The ones who kind of step in and go, all right, let me take this on. And now all of a sudden they were stuck behind somebody or in a position where they couldn't get to that next level, and now they can. And I think that's kind of the natural thing of what happens in the corporate jungle, right? There's kind of someone gets eaten by a lion, and now it's time for the next person to step in there. And it's a lot. I feel like I'm being pessimistic about it, but there's a little bit of the value of the value of change is that it gives other people opportunities where they may not have had one without that change.
Yeah. And framing is really important here, right? And so if we think about this, if we're growing in an organization, all we ever hear is the person in front of us saying, oh my gosh, it's so much hours and it's so much travel and it's all this, rah, 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 right? Like this complaining. Why would I ever want that job? I don't want that job. But if we really shift and start to think, okay, what does this person really need? And what are the great points in this job? I have the opportunity to see the entire country. And I've done that in my first 5 years of my career. I had an opportunity to go get my engineering, certification license in that first 4 years because I was working under a PE, and I got to work on all these projects that were this, and this, right? So part of the culture that we talked about earlier is, what is the culture we want? Do we want our culture to be a bitching culture about all the things that are wrong? Or do we want our culture to be one of collaboration and requests and conversations to truly have that growth? It doesn't mean that we don't not address the negative things that are happening. But what it does mean is we really start to actually celebrate the wins every day versus talk about all the losses every day.
I mean, people who talk negative in an organization, are they cancerous?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, do you fire them? I mean, like if someone's being a negative Nancy, right, or a negative Bob or whatever. Sorry, I don't mean to be sex. If someone's just being negative, is it even though you're going to cause a hole in your organization, is it better to have the hole than to have the negativity?
I'm going to start with it depends.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm saying it depends is we're going to start to have that conversation and do some coaching around it and figure out, why are they being negative? Now, let me go back to our first 5 minutes on the show. And that was, is this somebody that's truly proven that they're a rock star and they're producing a significant amount of work, right? We're going to invest in that. Let me give you an example. I have a client right now that I've been working with, and, the amount of work that they have right now is significant. They just doubled their team. They just brought on twice as many employees that they had previously. And, what's happening is now everyone's bitching that they don't want to train anyone, right? Well, I don't have time to train you. I don't have time to train anyone. So I sat them down. I said, okay, guys, help me understand. You're telling me you don't have time to train someone, but if we turn over one or two of these, and the response was, well, they're not helping me right now anyway. And I said, But what happens in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when they can be out on the job site and you don't have to be? Oh man, they're going to be a huge help then. I said, okay, then the way that we just talked to each other and the way that we just talked about them, will that keep them? Well, I guess not. Okay, so does this actually serve you? Well, not today. And so there's times we
Yeah.
need to start to have these conversations. So in that same conversation, I had reached out to one of them and I said, hey, help me understand what's going on. I know the quality of work you produce is incredible, yet you're behind on this and this. And there's some behaviors here that are not okay. And he's like, Tracy, here's what's going on. And we had a conversation about it. And once I understood where he was coming from and could have some empathy for that. So again, that plate, I wonder what's on their plate that I don't yet know about. It doesn't mean that we allow the negative behavior to happen. What it does mean is I just said, hey, what do you need right now? He said, I need to have 8 hours where I can finish XYZ reports so that I can feel like I'm not overwhelmed. Because when I'm overwhelmed and drowning, I'm actually doing less work than I would be if I felt like I was caught up. I said, then what would it take to get you caught up?
That's interesting, right? It's that small little shift. Like if I had a 1 8-hour day to stop this, to stop his overwhelmedness, right? To give that person his overwhelm, to get those reports out, to solve it. I don't think anybody would, if you could articulate, if they could articulate that, and go, yeah, I think that's a prescription that works, right? Can they see that, right? Is that that's an interesting one to look at, to look at is, what is it that's causing you to do that, right? What is causing you to be there? I sometimes I wonder if there just are people, how do you weed that out from the get-go, right? Because being able to see that, are they that way to begin with, right? Yeah. So let's go back. How do you see that? How do you see the type of person they are in an interview? How do you see that? Right.
There's an and both to this, and I'm not going to tell you can see it with every person because you can't. I mean, you can't. People's true colors show about 3 months in. So I'm going to name that up front. Like I've not found a foolproof way to do that. What I have found though is asking some of those questions around, tell me about the most stressful work environment you've ever been in. What made it stressful? How did you behave within that? Who are you working with? When we can start to ask those, and a lot of times I like to have team conversations as well, where we're really starting to have some of those conversations around what that looks like. What are some of those things that every single one of us has stress points that kind of throws us off? What is that for you? When I don't have the information I need, when I feel like I'm blamed for something that I had no responsibility for, right? So when we can start to learn those things up front, now we know what they are. We also know what allows you to start to move past them and around them when they come up. Because guess what? In the organizations you and I work with, they will come up, guaranteed. If we tell them they're not, we're lying, and they don't deserve to work with us because we just lied to them, right? So,
right. Like to really know your people and to be with them in a way that says, look, things are going to come up and you're going to get stressed out. I like to create an environment that protects you and takes care of you there. I don't think there's a leader out. I mean, at least a good leader that I know that doesn't want to take care of their people. It's in the same spot. Well, sometimes people, don't want to be taken care of, and I think there's both of that in there, and I think I'm seeing that more and more in today's. There's just so much complexity to the world. Having someone like you that can do this and help a leader like me or any leader that's out there start to find those systems and techniques to finding and growing and the strategies for really designing a culture. It's great. It's fun to listen to. Now that I got you on the podcast, I got to get more into your podcast. Let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about the podcast.
Yeah. So our podcast is called the People Strategy Podcast, and we talk with trade organization leaders around what are the people strategies that work inside of their organization. And we also bring on other coaches, consultants about how do they help and serve organizations to be successful. And then we hear from their clients. So, we just had one on a couple weeks ago where she focuses on generational hiring and, really connecting with different generations in the workforce. And then we brought on her client, Ray Cox, who runs an engineering firm, and talked about how they lost 40% of their team during COVID. And then after COVID, how they rebuilt that and how they had to start to implement a social media strategy. Because if your employees are under the age of 30, 70% of them will never look at your website. They're only going to look at social media. So now, just to make this more complex, if we really want to attract the best people to our organizations, we need to meet them where they're at and talk about the culture.
It is so much fun having you on the podcast. We got to have you more. I need more of it. I need more of you. Traci Austin, you are a magician at this. It does help me as a leader to have these kind of questions, these kind of conversations. If people want to hire you or have you come to their organization, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can find us at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. And we have something called our Tough Talk Audit. If you want to throw that in the show notes, it actually walks through how to take a complaint to a request. And you can connect with us there as well.
We'll have a link to that Tough Talk Audit down below. And Traci Austin, it's amazing. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Audience members, thanks for listening today. Last week we had another breakthrough week. It's been crazy, the amount of followers and subscribers we had, but we noticed that a lot of you guys made it to the end of the podcast, and some of you weren't still subscribers. If you could take a second and like and subscribe now, it makes a world of difference to the team in the background that work tirelessly to bring these podcasts together. If you could, Lissa and Joe and the team in the background work really hard at doing it. And the numbers do make a difference, right? They really do make a difference. So if you could like and subscribe now, I would be grateful. We'd all be grateful. And as always, thanks for listening.